Showtime! The Capital G show starts right now. What's up YouTube, Capital G here, doing a boomer bust on heroes, elemental, mass, however you want to classify them. You guys know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the archetype that just got a huge boost from the hero structure deck, and it's finally in the TCG. It's legal on Dueling Network and at any premier event. So I'm going to talk about it. People have been anticipating this and kind of waiting for it for a very long time. It is a slow-paced control deck. I don't really think that I've seen players OTK with it, but I'm sure the possibilities because of a hero lives and because of, you know, random things like this and this, that there are, I mean, the potential for OTK plays might be there. I don't really think that they'll happen that much. Now, the first thing that I noticed when seeing this deck play competitively is this card right here is the whole fucking show. I mean, it was hyped and it delivered on the bill of goods that we were sold. Shadow Mist does pretty much everything that you need it to do. It gets you mass change right here. It gets you monsters when it goes to the graveyard or when it's detached from an Xyz. It can't miss timing. The card is amazing. It seems like a card that has been adjusted to power creep, and it would be fantastic if Stratos was legal in the TCG, but I don't think that you technically need it. I think that it more or less is just icing on cake. So the basic setup for this deck usually is to get this card special summoned during your first turn, especially if you're going first, and then you can obviously search a copy of Mass Change, threatening your opponent with Dark Law, which is just a fucking insane card. It's basically the win condition. And I'm going to say when this deck goes first, it has a power play probably equivalent to Burning Abyss. And I mean, that is the fucking top of the food chain, because when a Burning Abyss player opens with like Double Dante, especially if they have Fire Lake, a lot of times there's nothing you can do. That player has just won the game. The difference here is a lot of times you can like snipe out the Fire Lake with maybe an MST or a Night Beam if they only have like one set. With this deck, you can't necessarily do that. You know, the great thing about this deck is you don't have to commit to anything. I mean, sure, you're going to summon Dark Law and your opponent knows you're going to summon Dark Law, but there's nothing they can do to stop it. And I say that because you really just wait for them to make a play. It's kind of like you're Randy Orton and they know they're going to get RKO'd. They just don't know when. You know what I mean? So much of the game has been boiled down to what you can do in your first couple of turns. And every deck, let's face it, likes to search during their first turn or likes to use their graveyard. And this deck says, well, you're not going to do that. You know, how many decks in the game like to play either or like to open their turns with Summoner's Art or, you know, Cleaford Scout or Reinforcements of the Army, Pot of Duality, Upstart Goblin? This card right here stops all of that shit. I mean, granted, you still get to resolve the card, but who likes getting cards taken out of their hand and banished? Like, don't nobody like that shit. I mean, that's what Dark Law does. And then at the same time, your opponent gets to actually trigger this card, which they just triggered during their turn. I mean, that's just nasty. Being able to search for a free copy of Bubble Man for no reason at all, and it's pretty much unstoppable. I mean, your opponent can try and snipe out the Mass Change, but if they actually target it for MST, then, well, basically all you do is chain it. You get this guy's effect, you summon Dark Law, and then it just went neg. So, you know, the plus that they would have, or the neg that they would have taken off of, you know, trying to search under Dark Law, they pretty much took just off a blind MST, and you still had the potential to get that. Now, with that being said, players are probably wondering, well, how do you do this? I mean, it's pretty obvious. There are so many different ways to summon this guy consistently turn one. Hero Lives has been played forever in Heroes, and you obviously have things like Summoner Monk, Goblinberg, and 10 Goldfish that can special summon it. You guys should remember this from the Infernity days where they were playing this card for like to trigger Archfiend and whatnot. Interesting note about Goblinberg: if your opponent has heroic Gandiva on board, they actually can't destroy Shadow Mist, because the last thing to happen is this guy switching to defense. So it's like they're trying to interrupt. It's like they're trying to interrupt the chain and what happens. It's just a little tidbit that players are probably going to want to know about. Now, what are some benefits of Heroes? What are some of the things that they have going for them? Okay, well, they do have their kind of, oh my god, top deck card. Pretty much every deck in the game has one, whether it's Scout, Tour Guide, Altier. I don't think that theirs is necessarily as strong because it's not quite quite as versatile. The card I'm talking about obviously is Miracle Fusion. Second thing is, I don't think hand traps are good against this deck at all. I mean, you can maybe argue Effect Veiler, but Effect Veiler is kind of a dying card just because you can't play it against Cleese. It just does nothing against that deck. And the difference between Max C against this deck and Max C against, like, you know, Shadows or Teller Knights or, you know, Burning Abyss is when the player goes first with heroes and they attempt a special summon with this, or, you know, one of these guys, you know, obviously trying to get Shadow Mist out, and you Max C, you'll get one card, but they don't have to commit anything else. All they were trying to do is get this card on field so that they could get Mass Change and then go to Dark Law. When those other decks special summon, a lot of times, you know, they wanted to do some other shit with their Vega or their Altair, or, you know, if a Burning Abyss player is going first, they didn't just want to tour guide and sit on Skarm. They wanted to do other shit. When a Shadow player activates Fusion, you know, they wanted to summon that fusion monster, that window or construct, but chances are they wanted to Falco too. So this is one of those decks where Max C doesn't really hurt them. And then after they have Dark Law, hand traps are just irrelevant because you can't even play them. So hand traps are just awful against this deck. And then, even though the deck is largely an archetype based deck, one of the things that's great about Heroes is this deck doesn't have any archetype restrictions. It's probably because Heroes were released over such a long time frame. But if you look at, you know, a lot of the relevant archetypes now, Burning Abyss, you know, if you control a non-BA or a face-down monster, they start blowing themselves up. And Teller Knights, you can't summon Trevor during a turn where you special summon anything but Teller Knights. And Cleese, if you have a Clee in your Pendulum Zone, then you can only special summon Cleese. And every deck kind of has like a weird little quirk about it. Infernoids with their stupid little level restriction and whatnot, and the fact that they can only be special summoned. Hello, Vanities. This deck doesn't have any of that. You know, the heroes are all different attributes. And unlike Shadows, if you can't fusion summon, this deck can exceed pretty well, even though it doesn't have any one card exceed. So, you know, the deck doesn't really rely on one thing that much. So I do think that even though it's an archetype deck, it doesn't have any archetype restrictions at all, which is, it's definitely going to be relevant in competitive play. Now, I think that what hero players are going to struggle with is finding the right build. I've actually seen a lot of players not really know 100% what traps and what spells, or actually defensive type spells, are good, because the deck is a slow pace control deck. And I mean, for the most part, once you get this guy out, you want to protect it for a couple of turns. Mirror Force is actually becoming very relevant again, so you might have to start making adjustments, because if the player has Dark Law out, Mirror Force kind of acts like a field deprison. You know, remember when Mirror Force was awful when Shadows were released and Burning Abyss, because they could basically take Mirror Forces and all shit would trigger? Well, not against this deck. If they happen to have Dark Law out, this basically becomes deprison for every monster on the field. But what I think that players are going to start having to do is look towards the OCG. You know, some of these cards like Dragon and Armageddon Knight, they can actually be high utility. You know, this deck can sometimes struggle getting rid of bigger monsters that are bigger than Dark Law. A lot of times you have to Fiendish Chain them, and you have to kind of wait until you can exceed into a Castel or something like that. You know, why have to worry about that when you can just set a dragon, flip it, bam, get rid of that monster? You know, Armageddon Knight, it's a searchable card, it's dark, so you can start running things like maybe Allure of Darkness in the deck. You can use Rhoda on it, and it can be an MST. If you send Dragon, it can trigger Shadow Mist, and you can send Zephyros, which is a card that's fantastic because it's a rank 4 enabler, and it lets you reuse things like Fiendish Chain, which the deck already runs. So I think that players are going to start having to look towards the OCG. I mean, I think that right now, pretty much the biggest Achilles heel of this deck is players just trying to find the right build. Now, with that being said, the deck does have some pitfalls. For starters, it's not a play from behind deck at all. I mean, a lot of times when Dark Law dies, you just lose because, you know, even though you don't invest a ton into this guy, your top deck power plays are not nearly on the level of every other deck. I mean, again, your greatest top deck power play is pretty much this, Miracle Fusion, which gives you one monster. It's nothing on the level of, you know, Burning Abyss, where you can go Tour Guide and end up with double Dantes off of random ass mills, or even Serteller Knights, where you flip over a Call of the Haunted. Next thing you know, you've got 3 monsters on board. Trevor, you call the Haunted back to your hand. You end up with Diamond picking a card out of their hand. It's just nuts. You know, a Call of the Haunted and Teller Knights can end up being like a +3 or +4. And this deck doesn't really have anything. I would say Cleese, same thing. You top deck a Scout and pinch them 5 monsters. Totally fair. This deck doesn't have anything on that level. This is just that card, and it's not searchable. So, you know, take it for what it is. But I think that Heroes are definitely viable. I think they're going to be a really good deck, just because the threat of Dark Law turn 1 and the fact that a lot of times your opponent can't do anything about it is what makes the deck really good. I must have been sitting here recording for way too long. It's timed out. So let me know what you guys think. I think that Heroes are a boom. I think when players start finding out the perfect builds, I think this deck is definitely going to contend for tier 1. It's even still really relevant in Japan because it's so good against Niklovs. You know, Niklov player tries to search with a Manju and you just pick apart their hand, and then when they want to ritual summon, all of their shit, including their ritual spell, goes to the banish zone. It boils down to the fact that Dark Law is a pain in the ass for pretty much every deck. And unless your opponent has the perfect kind of counter of force out Dark Law and then snatch steal Regeki, it's just a pain to deal with that card. And no deck really likes dealing with Dark Law. Thank you guys for watching as always. Tell me what you think of Heroes. I'm going to be trying to get some hero duels for DN commentary. Thank you guys for watching as always.